I am Nayan Patel, famous Michigan's PBB contamination, which took place in 1973. So the objectives of this case studies are to understand the cause of disaster, the events which led to the disaster, action taken after the disaster, health consequences due to exposure and contamination in animals and in humans, and learn about the aftermath of the disaster. So the table of content, we will look into the timelines of the events, what is PBB, location of the events, management of contaminated livestock and goods, exposure risk and health effects, and outcome of the disaster. So the timelines of the events. In 1973, the shipment of Firemaster FF1 mistakenly was sent to Farm Bureau Services, where Firemaster FF1 was added into the animal feeds. The farm animals were contaminated after consuming the animal feed. 1974, the PBB was identified as a cause of toxic effects. In 1975, 9 mills were found to still be producing contaminated feed. 1976, blood samples were taken from Michigan residents to study the effects. So what is PBB? PBB is basically polybrominated biphenyl, also known as polybromobiphenyls. These are the groups of hydrogenated hydrocarbons formed by substituting hydrogen with bromine on the biphenyl rings. The structure you can see in the picture given here. So PBBs are basically flame retardants and they have been used in electronic appliances at home. So the location of this disaster was in Michigan. In this slide you can see the picture of isolated farms covered in dark blue areas and according to the levels of PBB contamination. And in the second picture you can see the geographical location of the incident in which. So what events led to this disaster? In 1973, at Visco's Michigan Chemical Company, Firemaster FF1 was mistakenly shipped to Farm Bureau Service feed mill instead of Nutrimaster. So the FF1 was accidentally mixed into the animal feed, and this led to contamination of animal feed and due to the consumption of this animal feed by the livestock, it led to contamination in all the livestock in that area. So this continued till 1974. As the health problems in the livestock started emerging, they started showing symptoms. And after the investigation, the cause was finally identified, and efforts were focused on stopping the contamination from spreading furthermore. And USA FDA regulated that PBB level must be less than 1 part per million in dairy products intended for human consumption. So health effects on livestock after consumption of contaminated PBB. So the residents noticed that the cow's feed consumption was decreased by 50%. There was decrease in milk production. There was difficulty in reproducing, and if the reproduction took place, they had abnormal offsprings. Cow had abnormal hoof growth, hyperkeratosis, and hematomas. Cysts were found on the dead cow's livers and other organs. Intra-abdominal adhesions explained decreased feed consumptions and underweight. Fibroids in the lungs, enlarged thymus glands, lesions and lymphocytes infiltrations in the liver and kidneys. Also, bulls had reduced number of sperms, which lack of sperms due to atrophied testes. So in this slide, you can see the destructions of contaminated livestock. In this pie chart, there is a representation of number of cattle, pigs, sheep, and chickens which have been killed due to contamination and to stop the spreading of contamination. And in this picture, you can see the dead cows being buried in the area. So apart from the livestock which are destroyed, also the food items had to be destroyed because of the to stop the spreading of contamination. So here you can see around 800 pounds of animal products was destroyed. Around 18,000 pounds of cheese was destroyed.
So the study was conducted in which the effects of PBB in animal models was monitored, where in this table you can see animal models and their symptoms. So the exposed cows with contaminated with PBBs, they showed emaciated, diarrhea, excessive salivation, miscarried, decreased milk production, and lesion of kidney and liver and skin. Also, they showed like depressed heart rates, respiratory rates, and died after 1 to 2 months. And the another group was studied in which the pregnant cows were fed with 25,000 milligram of that is around 3,250 parts per million of PBBs, in which the cows showed similar effects as the exposed cows. And there was one more control group in which the cows were fed around 100 milligram per day, that is 13 parts per million of PBBs, which showed a milder symptoms like lacrimation, hyperkeratosis, alopecia, elevated lymphocytes, and decreased milk production.
Studies in 60 dairy cattle showed that PBB was directly absorbed from GI tract, and it showed was detected in bloodstreams merely after hours of ingestion. It was concentrated in lipid-rich tissues like adipose tissues in the cows. In this graph, you can see the concentration of PBBS in liver and blood plasma. Slide will be looking at the impacts of PBB on human health. So people exposed to PBB in 1970s, like women and men with direct exposure to PBB, had increased risk of digestive system, cancer and lymphomas, thyroid problems. In women with fewer days between menstrual periods and more delays of menstrual bleedings, lower estrogen levels, and increased risk of breast cancer. Further studies in humans showed that people born to mother exposed to PBB, their daughter of woman with PBB exposure experienced, on an average, started menstruating a year earlier. They had short stature. More likely they were to experience miscarriages as an adult. One of the women with PBB exposure experienced slower growth in childhood, reported more urinary and genital conditions, example hypospadias. The, the recent studies in 2012 to 2015, PBB was measured in the blood samples of the individuals related to the PBB contamination incident in the Michigan. The results showed that these people and their children have higher PBB in their blood than that of a general US population, even after 40 years of the incident. PBB concentration was noted to be 2 to 3 times higher in the individuals who were highly or directly exposed in the past. So to summarize this case study, PBB is a flame retardant used in plastic appliances. In 1973, workers at Viscol's Michigan Chemical Company mistakenly shipped FF1 to Farm Bureau Services instead of NutriMaster. After consumption of contaminated feed, cattle started developing symptoms and health effects. Once the toxic material was identified, the contaminated livestock and food items were destroyed. The recent study, after 40 years, the PBB contamination still shows concentration in the exposed individuals.